Welcome to CHD 206. This week we're going to be focusing on child abuse and neglect as well as mandatory reporting. There we go. In 1866, Henry Bergh, a philanthropist and diplomat who recognized the inhumane treatment of animals in our society, founded the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, which we know as the ASPCA. Prompting New York State legislators to pass the country's first effective anti-cruelty to animal laws, the ASPCA is the oldest humane organization in America. 8 years later, a young girl was found tied to a bed like an animal, neglected, and brutally beaten by her foster parents. So back in 1874, animals were legally protected from inhumane treatment, but children were not. Child abuse and neglect was considered a family matter, and there was no one to intervene on behalf of the children. That is until a small group of concerned citizens in New York City came together in 1875 with the assistance of the man from before from the ASPCA, Henry Bergh, to become the first organized child protective institution in the world, and that was the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. So let's meet the little girl who started it all. Let's find here.
My name is Mary Ellen Wilson. I don't know how old I am. Mama whips and beats me almost every day. I've never been kissed by Mama. I am never allowed to play with other children. I never dared to speak to anybody, because if I did, I would get whipped. Whenever Mama goes out, she locks me in the bedroom. I've never been outside.
In 1873, Mary Ellen was discovered by a church worker who had been asked to check on the family. What Etta Wheeler found was horrifying.
She was a tiny mite, the size of 5 years, though she was then 9. From a pan set upon a low stool, she washed dishes, struggling with a frying pan about as heavy as herself. Across the table lay a brutal whip of twisted leather strands. The child's meager arms and legs bore many marks of its use. But the saddest part of her story was written on her face. The look of suppression and misery. The face of a child unloved who had seen only the fearsome side of life.
Mrs. Wheeler went straight to the police. They told her she must furnish proof of assault. Astonishingly, her eyewitness account of the child's scars and living conditions was not proof enough. Even though there were laws to protect a person from assault and battery, there were no laws allowing intervention inside a child's home. Mrs. Wheeler was undeterred. In casting around for some way to rescue Mary Ellen, her niece offered a useful bit of information. Children might not be protected from physical abuse, but animals were. Mrs. Wheeler petitioned the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, arguing that children were members of the animal kingdom and must therefore be protected. She persisted until Henry Bergh, legal counsel and then president of the ASPCA, stepped in. Based on Berg's reputation and his connections with the court and police, Mary Ellen was finally removed from her abusive home.
So, thus the beginning of an American society to confront its inherent moral obligation to protect kids, even from their parents. But reporting child abuse was not required. Reports stemmed only from incidents which involved serious physical injury to death. And so it was still in the late 1950s. What happened in the family was regarded as a very private matter, and children were considered their parents' chattel until, in 1962, Dr. Henry C. Kemp described the battered child syndrome and urged physicians to report suspected child abuse. Eventually, many states responded to their perceived moral and legal responsibilities by making child abuse a criminal act during the late 1960s. However, reporting child abuse was still not legally required. Consequently, most incidents of suspected child abuse remained behind closed doors and were neither acknowledged nor challenged. And then finally, in 1974, the United States Congress enacted the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, which provided federal funds dedicated to the prevention of child abuse. For states that passed laws requiring certain professionals like law enforcement, educators, medical and mental health care professionals, they must report child abuse, suspected child maltreatment. Every state had mandated reporting laws enacted within their legislation shortly thereafter. So that brings us to Alabama. Our community-based child abuse prevention refers to a child abuse prevention program that exists in every state in the United States. And this CBCAP legislation requires that the state lead agency has the capacity and commitment to meaningful involved parents as stated below. Such lead entities in an existing public, quasi-public, or non-profit private entity, which may be an entity that has not been established pursuant to state legislation, executive order, or any other written authority of the state, with a demonstration ability to work with other state and community-based agencies to provide training and technical assistance, and that has the capacity and commitment to ensure the meaningful involvement of parents who are consumers and who can provide leadership in the planning, implementation, and evaluation of programs and policy decisions of the applicant agency in accomplishing the desired outcomes for such efforts. In Alabama, the lead agency is the Department of Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention through the Children's Trust Fund. The federal government provides money each year for states to promote community-based approaches to strengthen families and communities. The government has also had legislated each state to provide services that promote comprehensive support for parents, promote the development of parenting skills, improve family access to formal and informal resources, support the need of parents with disabilities through respite or other activities, provide referrals for early health and development services, and promote meaningful parent leadership. And so you can see a lot of those things going on in our community currently. Now, the Martin Aldridge Child Abuse and Prevention Act, that was Alabama's Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Act, or ACANP, was adopted by the Alabama legislature in 1983 to address the state's growing problem of child neglect and maltreatment. While several state agencies already exist to deal with different aspects of child abuse, none of these agencies was specifically focused on solving the problem before it actually occurred. It was clear that Alabama needed to create state agencies with its own board, funding, and staff to be dedicated solely to preventing child abuse. To address the problem at its origin, instead of merely addressing the symptoms of what could have been prevented the ACANP Act established the Children's Trust Fund, and these dollars are intended to provide annual funding for community-based prevention programs throughout the state, as well as create a self-sustaining pool of funds to provide for the funding of these programs in the future. As Alabama's only state agency designated to prevent child abuse and neglect, it will be our goal to encourage and support each community in the state in their efforts to find goals, to encourage and support each community in the state and their efforts to find new and effective solutions for preventing child abuse before it occurs, and ultimately strengthening families to prevent this tragedy in the future. The Children's First Trust Fund was initiated in the mid-1990s by a group of advocates and legislators who wanted to improve the lives of children in Alabama. Efforts focused on increasing cigarette taxes to fund a wide array of needed programs and services. For several years, the Children's First legislation was introduced but not passed, each year gaining more credibility and supporters. During the same period, negotiations were being conducted between tobacco companies and the states to settle lawsuits stemming from health costs from smoking. At the end of the legislation session in 1998, any potential tobacco settlement funds were linked to Children's First. Later that year, the landmark agreement between the states and the big tobacco companies was reached, and settlement dollars began to come to the states in the late 2000s. The 21st Century Fund was set up to receive the settlement and distribute funds to pay for economic development books, medical care, and programs for the elderly, with the majority of the settlement going to the Children's First Trust Fund. When tobacco settlement dollars come to Alabama, they are deposited into this 21st Century Fund, where the first $13 million is used for debt services on economic development, bonds, assisting Honda and Hyundai to locate to Alabama is one of the several economic efforts funded through these bonds. The remaining tobacco dollars are then split between Children's First, which is about 52%, and Medicaid, which is approximately 31%, and then several other small funds. Once money comes to Children's First, the fund is then divided among 12 agencies for specific programs as instructed by law. Once funds are deposited into the Children's First Trust Fund, they cannot be spent until the legislator appropriates them to the agency. Until then, the funds cannot be used for any other purposes. Unspent money remains within the fund, and individual departments accrue the balance. An annual report is prepared which details the expenditures of the Children's First Trust Fund dollars, and all of that information can be found online if you are interested. So for over 30 years, the department has worked on behalf of those most vulnerable in our state. This year alone, the department funded 139 programs across the state, totaling over $5.8 million. These programs provided essential services to children and families to prevent child abuse and neglect. The types of programs included are parent education support, fatherhood, pathways to responsible fatherhood and TANF, home visitation, community awareness, respite care, school-based, non-school-based after-school and mentoring. And these programs are supported by state and federal dollars through the four main funding streams that we spoke about earlier. So Prevent Child Abuse America. In May 2007, the ADCANP was charted as the Alabama chapter of Prevent Child Abuse America. Their mission is to prevent the abuse and neglect of our nation's children, and their values are valuing children, strengthening families, and engaging communities. And we have community-based prevention programs that fit underneath this category, as well as public policy advocacy, public education, and also a network of state chapters. So what is a mandated reporter? That is any professional that is in a daily sees and works with children daily. So we've got a huge list right here: hospitals, clinics, dentists, law enforcement, teachers, clergy, doctors, nurses, and the list goes on and on. But recently we've added public therapists, public and private K through 12 employees, employees of public and private institutions of post-secondary and higher education, and those are ones that are updated for the current law. Some other changes to the law have been the statement or cause reports to be made of the same has been eliminated from the law, and it's the responsibility of the mandated reporter to make the report and follow up with a written report to the county DHR. So no longer is it that you suspect child abuse and neglect, you go to your supervisor, you tell them, and then they make the report. You do still need to tell your supervisor you're making a report, but you are the one who actually is making it. So what's child abuse? Under the Alabama law, it is harm or threatened harm to a child's health or welfare which can occur through non-accidental physical or mental injury, sexual abuse or attempted sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, or attempted sexual exploitation. And here are just some very sad statistics. 1 in every 4 girls will be sexually abused by the age of 18. 1 in every 6 boys will be sexually abused by the age of 18. 1 in every 5 children in our country is affected by some form of child abuse, whether it's emotional, sexual, physical, or neglect. And 1 in every 10 children in our country is seriously injured by child abuse. We have 4 different types of categories for child abuse, and 90% of abusers are family members. And then the abuse, again, is in these 4 categories that you see on the screen: sexual, physical, emotional, and then neglect, which is also failure to thrive. Physical abuse is non-accidental physical injury, like bruises, bites, burns, as well as some other injuries. Children often refuse to discuss their injuries. These children often wear clothing to hide their injuries, inappropriate for the weather, and they can also have an unusual fear of adults. Sexual abuse is forcing a child to observe or engage in sexual activities with an adult. And there's 2 separate kinds of that as well within sexual abuse. We have incest, which is sexual abuse by a relative, and then we also have the word molestation, which is sexual contact made by somebody outside of the family with a child. And so it gets segregated into those 2 categories. And then we also have sexual exploitation, which is allowing, permitting, or encouraging a child to engage in prostitution, or using a child to engage in the obscene or pornographic photographing, filming, or depicting of a child for commercial purposes is also sexual exploitation. So when we look at sexual abuse, there may be signs of pain complaints. Sexually abused children commonly have poor peer behaviors as well. Emotional abuse is the abuse of child self-concept through words or actions. Children lose self-esteem due to emotional abuse. And when we're looking at emotional abuse, we look for refusal to talk, unusual or unpredictable behavior, rare smiling or laughing, excessive clinginess or crying, withdrawn or destructive behavior, poor motor conditions for their age, and then also a fear of adults. Neglect takes many forms, and it may be deprived of proper food, medical and dental care, shelter, and or clothing. Under Alabama law, it is negligent treatment or maltreatment of a child, including the failure to provide adequate food, medical treatment, clothing, or shelter, provided, however, that a parent or guardian legitimately practicing his religious beliefs, who thereby does not provide specific medical treatment for a child, for that reason alone shall not be considered a negligent parent or guardian. However, such an exception shall not preclude a court from ordering that medical services be provided to the child where his health requires it. When we look for neglect, teachers should be alert to some signs like the child often arrives early or picked up late, inappropriate or unclean clothing, poor hygiene or medical problems. They might be always hungry or fatigued. And when we're talking about neglect, these are the children's basic needs that we're trying to make sure are met. And we've got nutrition, sleep, shelter, cleanliness, medical care, safety, supervision, and socialization, all fit underneath neglect. Most abusers are members of the victim families. We said earlier that it's about 90%. And then we also have caretakers or a parent or a close relative. Contrary to common belief, males and females perpetrate abuse against their own children at surprisingly similar rates. And then among all abused children, those abused by their birth parents were about equally likely to have been abused by mothers as by fathers, about 50%. But those abused by other parents, parent substitutes, or male or non-parental perpetrators were much more likely to be abused by males. And that was about 80 to 90% by males versus the 14 to 15% by females. So that's just a really interesting statistic where when you have family members that it is about 50-50, male versus female, mom versus dad. But then when you go outside of the family, it's more prevalent for males. Each week, Child Protective Services, different agencies throughout the United States receive more than 50,000 reports of suspected child abuse or neglect. In 2002, 2.6 million reports concerning the welfare of approximately 4.5 million children were made. In approximately two-thirds, 67% of these cases, the information provided in the report was sufficient to prompt an assessment or investigation. As a result of these investigations, approximately 896,000 children were found to have been victims of abuse or neglect, an average of more than 2,450 children per day. More than half of victims experienced neglect, meaning a caretaker failed to provide for the child's basic needs. Fewer victims experienced physical abuse, about 20%, or sexual abuse, 10%, though these cases are typically more likely to be publicized. The small number, about 7%, were found to be victims of emotional abuse, which include criticizing, rejecting, or refusing to nurture a child. An average of nearly 4 children die every day as a result of child abuse or neglect, and that was 1,400 children in 2002. And I just want to bring attention to this book here on the screen, The Child Maltreatment. This one is the 2013 edition. Each year, the Children's Bureau puts together a book of data that goes along with all of these statistics that we're talking about. And so you can follow that link to go there to find out more. And you can look within nationwide or your state, and it even breaks it down into your county of all the different kind of demographics. So how can I be certain that a child has been abused or neglected? Certainty is not required. In most cases, the only way you could be absolutely certain that a child has been abused or neglected would be if the parent or other person admitted it. All that is required is a reasonable suspicion that a child is a victim of abuse or neglect. After investigating the report, the department determines whether there was actually abuse or neglect. So when we're looking to make a report, we want to think on protecting the children. So if you suspect it, not that you certainly know it, you are to make a report. When you make a report, you report to the chief or police or sheriff or to the Department of Human Resources. When a report is made to law enforcement officials, he must inform the department so that protective services to the child or children involved may also be provided. And so here on the screen you have a list of local DHR agencies around us. You can also call the DHR State Family Services Division, and then again, we can certainly use our police for that. If you are among those persons required to report child abuse and neglect, and if you're watching this, you certainly are, and you learn about a child whose conditions or injuries are not reasonably explainable as an accident, or if you are called on to treat such injuries, you must report immediately by telephone or in person. The law also requires you to follow your oral report with a written one. The Department of Human Resources has a form for your written report, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit. So what is it that you must report? Both oral and written reports should include the name of the child, his whereabouts, the names and addresses of the parents or guardians, and a description of the child's condition. Don't delay in reporting if you don't have all the information, because you can obtain all of that later. Remember, we're thinking in the best interest of the child. So here's a look at the form that you would complete, even if you gave your oral one first, so that they can have all of the information that they need to process any kind of investigation that will happen after the fact. So what's your liability? How are you protected? All persons reporting suspected abuse or neglect, whether required by law to report or not, are presumed to be acting in good faith. They are by law immune from legal action, civil or criminal, that might otherwise be taken. Thus, you have full protection in an event a parent or someone else should seek to initiate action against you. And so another question that comes up with liability is will you have to testify in court? And that just really depends on the nature and the severity of the case, whether court action is initiated to remove the child from the home, and whether the alleged party is prosecuted on a criminal charge. The law is specific. The doctrine of privileged communication shall not be a ground for excluding any evidence regarding to a child's injuries or the cause of thereof. Also, to go along with liability and going to court, is your job protected? And the code states that, yes, your job is protected. A public or private employer who discharges, suspends, disciplines, or penalizes an employee for solely reporting suspected child abuse or neglect shall be guilty of a Class C misdemeanor. So if that is the only reason that somebody would be fired, then you can certainly have, or not even just fired, but penalized in some kind of way, that agency or that employer will have a Class C misdemeanor against them. But if you do not report, you can be punished by jail time as well as a monetary sentence. A monetary fine, I suppose. Generally, Alabama law requires the Department of Human Resources to seek out through investigation complaints from citizens or otherwise the minor children in need of its care and protection, aid such children to a fair opportunity in life. The department works closely with the child and the parents of the caretaker through direct counseling or referral to appropriate helping professionals or agencies. The purpose to provide these services is to keep the family unit together if possible. Nobody's trying to go in and break up families. We want what's best for the children and the family. If removal of the child from his home is necessary, the department will petition the court for custody and make plans for substitute care of the child. The department will continue to work with the child and seek to work with the parents to prepare them for the time when the child may be returned to their home or receive continued care elsewhere. No group of children is immune to child abuse and neglect. Boys and girls are about equally likely to be abused and neglected. Children of all races and ethnicities experience child abuse. Children of all ages experience abuse and neglect, but the youngest children are most vulnerable. Children younger than 1 year old accounted for 41% of all abuse-related deaths reported in 2002. 3/4 of those killed were younger than 4. Girls are sexually abused 3 times more often than boys. Boys are at a greater risk of serious injury and emotional neglect than girls. It is estimated that children with disabilities are 4 to 10 times more vulnerable to sexual abuse than their non-disabled peers. The incident of fatally injured girls has declined slightly, while the incident of fatally injured boys rose. Poverty is significantly related to incidence rates in nearly every category of maltreatment compared to children whose families earned $30,000 or more. Children and families with annual incomes below $15,000 were 22 times more likely to experience maltreatment under the harm standards and 25 times more likely under the endangerment standard. Children whose parents abuse drugs or alcohol are also put at a greater risk of violence. And so here's another one of those data books. Alabama Kids, the Alabama Kids Count data book is going to give lots of data, again, based on statewide and countywide, of all of these different areas of well-being. This past year, Alabama is ranked 44th in the nation based on the 10 key indicators of child well-being. That's, 44th out of 50, not great, but it has risen up 1 point. But when we look at that, these are things that directly relate to child abuse and neglect. The low birth weights, high school dropout rates, children in poverty, children in single-family homes. And so here we can get a lot of data to back up that we in our communities actually do need some more child abuse and neglect prevention. And there's just a couple statistics about Alabama. So the long-term effects of child abuse and neglect, none of these should really seem out of the ordinary. We've got teenage pregnancy, unemployment, crime and violence, suicide, depression, learning disorders and speech deficits. All of these end up being some long-term effects of child abuse, as well as some that are not listed here. So what does child maltreatment mean to society? The annual cost of child abuse and neglect is $103.8 billion in 2007. A child who is abused and neglected is 59% more likely to be arrested as a juvenile than other children. And an estimated 1/3 of abused and neglected children will eventually victimize their own children. It's very costly. So when we take a look even more at this breakdown, we've got our direct and indirect costs that go completely and totally with child abuse. And then we have down here at the bottom of the screen how much money we have for prevention of these. So you can see that it is a drop in the bucket, but it is something. And the more prevention-based things we have, the less costs, the direct and indirect costs will be, because we're hoping to, prevent child abuse and neglect. So one of the ways that we promote child abuse and neglect prevention is through community action. We want to educate parents, we want to educate children, we want to work with community leaders, support children's legal rights, support special programs, promote community awareness. All these different types of things fall underneath the prevention of child abuse and neglect.